right, so I've got my dream team of panelists here. I thought it would be fun to start with the answer rather than the question. Say, tell us, rather than wait till the end of the panel for the takeaway, what is the thing that you want people to take away from that you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to AI use and energy sustainability? There's a lot of fake news or let's say willful misrepresentation, et cetera. We'll just go down the line. Put your cards on the table. That way we can advance the conversation by half an hour.
Love that. Well, then I'll say something. We'll all be done, and we'll just all walk and go to lunch, right? That's the
You can drop the mic, right? Well, except we're not holding the mic, so I'm going to keep you here.
So from my perspective, I think it's very easy to talk in broad, sweeping statements connecting energy use and data centers and generative AI. But it's really about understanding what points of the value chain are actually driving energy consumption and how you actually decarbonize or move that to a 100% carbon-free energy source. So, and I was. Can I ask a question in my statement as well?
Not yet. I'll give you a chance in a minute. Okay. So the myth you want to take on, or the point you want to leave, is don't overgeneralize. Really drill down into specific bits of the value chain and assess what's the real energy use.
Bingo.
Okay. Yes.
So for me, it's probably the perception of data centers and the role data centers play in general to the environment, the energy grid, and everything. The one thing that I've been in data centers for a very long time, and up until probably a few years ago, nobody knew what a data center was. And I think a lot of the conversation and changes that have happened have been more misperceptions. So for me,
summarize it in a sentence. What's the misperception that you're fighting against?
Data centers are bad. That's
I see.
the
Whereas
one
you posit that they are in fact good.
They are absolutely good. The way we design them, the way we actually play with them, the way we actually help society with the information and the things that go inside of a data center.
And just to be quite specific, again, we're here to talk about sustainability on this particular session. They may be good in providing jobs. They may be good paying customers to the electric utility. They may provide work to the construction crews that made them. But are you also claiming that somehow they're good for sustainability?
Absolutely. If you look
at now, well, that's
I'll
okay.
stop there.
That's a provocation. Good.
Yes.
Data centers good for the planet. Okay, we're going to come back to that one. Yes, go ahead.
I would say I think today there's a lot of noise in the system, and therefore many more people are working on developing data center sites that actually there will be data centers built by 2030. And that creates a lot of inefficiencies in how we look at power solutions for a lot of those data centers, because people are rushing, and that's how we end up with building a lot of natural gas or other fossil fuel solutions.
No, that's actually what's happening. You don't think that's not a misperception? That is the actual perception. That's actually what's happening.
I think it's happening, yeah. The rush into the market.
But is there something that people misunderstand that is a wrong idea that you want to say, this is a wrong idea? What do you challenge?
Well, the challenge is, I think the supply today is greater than what the actual demand is going to be in 2030. Not to say the demand is not going to be high,
right,
but we see this rush of people trying to get powered land and power sites and at any cost.
Okay.
And I think we don't need to grab it all at this point, and we can afford to be a little bit more thoughtful on long-term investments.
I see. And just to be super clear about this, is the supply of planned new data centers. You think it may be an overbuild or a bit of overhype on that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, great. Didn't I promise you interesting points, folks? This is each one of these super interesting. And so let's see. Now, why don't we start? Bruno, I'm going to give you points amongst this competitive team. Excellent answers from all, because you decided to go the furthest, actually saying data centers are going to be good for the planet. Tell us, what is the positive case at a time when all are up in arms, when, again, I mentioned on the big stage, President Trump mentioned in the State of the Union, he's bringing all these big data bosses to the White House tomorrow, or Wednesday, I should say, and browbeating them into a voluntary deal saying, we'll bring our own power. We promise we'll pay our way. You can have more water from us. We'll give you water. All these concessions are going to be made because the perception, certainly in America, in Ireland, I was just there too, same perception in many developed countries, that this is certainly bad for sustainability. What's the counter argument?
So there's a couple points. Let me hit the water one first.
Sure.
Because I hear that a lot.
Oh, you pick the easy one.
Well, I'll pick the easy one because then there are a few more opportunities as well. But from the water perspective, I just, again, I said I've been in the data center industry a long time.
Yeah.
And I think there's been so much innovation in cooling and heat recovery and heat removal that people forget the fact that we don't have, most data centers, or at least the ones that are sustainably focused, are not wasting water anymore. Most of us use a closed loop system that basically is efficient and doesn't waste any water. So I think that's the thing I want to make sure people understand, that data centers inherently don't waste water anymore. They used to. Wastewater, exactly. So it's basically the closed loop system is pretty critical for us to be able to build an efficient system on natural resources. The other thing that actually is happening now is data centers become more of the community, more of the environment. We're leveraging some options like heat recovery, and you mentioned it in your last panel in the other room, things like demand response, where we actually benefit the communities. The heat recovery thing, to me, is a huge benefit that we all should be leveraging. That's basically taking the heat that we extract from the buildings that are generated by the servers and using that for free to power homes, or to heat homes, office buildings, et cetera. So that's using an electron 2, 3, 4 times. So that's kind of the benefit type stuff that we need to do more of, that actually, to me, is beneficial to society. And that's one of the reasons why co-locating data centers within communities is huge. The jobs, the heat recovery, the ability for what we do in the data center to positively impact the community. That's why data centers are good, done the right way.
Done the right way. Well, you hit the nail on the head. Look, even on our own stage earlier today, the comment was made, data centers consume all this water. I wasn't the moderator, or else I certainly would have challenged that.
Thank you.
They can, and historically perhaps they did if they were built in old-fashioned ways. But I certainly know a few months ago I toured Stargate, the big facility that OpenAI and Oracle are building with Sam Altman, and I made sure to check what is the water usage. Because the night before I toured, as I make it a practice to go talk to the local people, hanging out at a bar in Abilene, Texas, and the locals were very concerned about the water. They're stealing our water in Texas. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, one of the locals told me. And this is their understanding, is that they're going to take all the water, and it's a very water scarce area. And in fact, and I knew enough because I had toured facilities that make immersion cooling and closed loop systems. The Schneider facility in northern Italy I had toured, for example, which is in conjunction with NVIDIA, makes these sort of closed loop systems for cooling chips. And I saw that is exactly the technology that they're deploying. It doesn't come for free. Initially more expensive, and maybe there's a trade-off with energy use, right? So you use a little bit more energy, but they're able to use just as much water as 1 or 2 American households.
Exactly.
In that entire gigawatt scale facility, just to give an idea of how dramatic this is. The point I want to push you on is, this is not done universally. So how do we get something like the current standard, best practice, to become the common practice, or even the absolute minimum practice? Is it standards? Is it regulation? Is it voluntary agreements? We have different models from air conditioners and fridges and other areas. We can look at cars and fuel economy standards. What do you advocate? And I'll ask either of you to jump in on this, because again, if you want to win over public trust, this is a great example of something misrepresented that can easily be demonstrated to be false, and the story is a lot better. But you can't be just a one-off, and look here, don't look at the 100 others.
Yeah.
So what do you advocate for?
It's got to start with sort of I don't think it's any one of those answers to your point, Vijay. It's going to be all of them, right? There's got to be some regulation. There's got to be more standards that evolve. And then I challenge the supply chain, like the Hitachis, to actually really focus on cooling solutions that really leverage that ability, right? For all of us, it does require to leverage that technology and keep our minds open. And I think the one thing that's driving our industry more than ever before is innovation. We've seen so much innovation on the cooling side, so much innovation on the power side, that the efficiencies and the sustainability piece is going to be a natural outcome of all of that. So it's a combination of all that's going to drive some of those efficiencies and standards.
Either of you want to jump in on this?
Yeah. Well, I was going to jump on the regulation piece, which is without necessarily mandating, what the data center should do as an industry. I think data transparency and traceability is very important. And in Europe, for instance, the European Commission is working on this energy efficiency directive, where they are standardizing what the metrics and the reporting process should be. It's very hard to define always, what are the right metrics to really represent the performance of data centers and its impact. But I think it's a very good step step in the right direction, not just for setting up numbers, but also even to educate to some extent the customers and the end customers, because very few people are actually very knowledgeable, like you said, around weather, what is the right order of magnitude, what is the PUE as well.
Right.
There's a huge delta right now in the industry in terms of energy efficiency and PUE, and I think that's something that needs to be a little bit more exposed as well to really incentivize the right behavior down the line.
We know in business what matters gets measured, what's measured gets managed.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
And so if we do have these more transparent metrics, it could certainly lead to better outcomes with the light of sunshine, if nothing else, on bad actors. You wanted to jump in as well?
I
on this
did.
topic?
The only thing I was going to add was collaboration. And I think, in this industry, you'd be surprised where it's like, I think, the definition is putting us into competitive, right? We're competitors, et cetera. But you might be surprised that NTT and AWS have a collaboration agreement, right? Of how to actually get and work more collaboratively around the systems as well as the processes of getting people to use AI more efficiently. And so I think that's something that's unique in an industry where we're seeing a lot of collaboration vocally, transparently around how, when we've set the bar for now what good looks like, how some of the other others in the market are starting to also learn from that and grow from that and change from that.
Great. Well, let's stay with you on your provocation we started off with, that we need to have a little more clarity and granularity on what parts of the value chain are actually creating sustainability challenges and which aren't. Tell us a little bit more about your thinking there.
Well, I'm gonna poll the audience if you'll let me.
But
All right.
please
So hands up if you've used a form of generative AI tooling in the last week. Yes. Good. Okay. I was expecting that. Well, wait. Keep your hands up if you actually selected the model that you used. Right? It's about 50%. So I think one of the things that's and in fairness, there's been so much innovation in terms of the models, in terms of the LLMs that have actually developed, that people forget that. Okay, so when you type in a chat, what is the weather on Mars, and that actually gets turned into tokens. Tokens then get transferred to a data center. The data center then computes and figures that out based on the LLM, and then sends it back to you. Right? I've just described the value chain in a very, very probably butchered way in 10 seconds or less. But there's different points in that value chain where energy is actually consumed, and you actually have levers that materially impact how it's being consumed. One of them, of many, is model choice, right? So there's been lots in the news around the surge of, I think if you look at any stat, like the number of LLMs that have shot up in the past, all of the different providers have their different LLMs. And then everyone's kind of going for the race for the best, right? But what does the best actually mean? Well, the best usually means it can handle the most complex loads. It can, it can break down everything I just said and compute it in 100 different ways.
So use the right tool for the job.
Use the right tool for the job. Don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, right? Like, and it's that type of thinking that, as we advance on this maturity, the LLMs are getting better at doing distinct things. And how we actually then, select which one that we use in ours and actually take some personal ownership and understanding that changes the game a little bit.
Okay, so you identified one weakling in this AI economy. That is all of you. You are the weak link.
I
Okay,
said that.
what else? What else you got for us? Other than blaming the consumer, which is a classic technique from big oil, by the way. What else you got for us in terms of weak links or areas where we could do better on sustainability?
Anybody else want to take this one? Okay.
Well, I can pick up on mine, which I mentioned at the beginning, which I think today there's this gold rush, right, to data centers and AI and so on, to the extent that it creates, I think, a lot of distortion in the market. And that's why we end up with a bit of this bottleneck between the number of sites being looked at and developed for data centers with the actual projects that are, have legs basically to be built. And I think it really slows us down in finding the right long-term solutions from a grid perspective, from a power perspective. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these discussions. Like the US and Europe is slightly different, right? US is all gas right now, with a lot of gigawatts and gigawatts being developed of behind-the-meter natural gas power plants. Europe, I think, will be a slightly different picture. But when you look at it, there's a lot of great challenges to integrate those new data centers. But this is one of the only vector of growth from an electricity demand perspective. And we need growth to really incentivize and pay for all of the grid modernization that is needed even before the data center boom. And secondly, there are many, many ways to power those data centers in ways that are not fossil fuel based, because our grids are not efficient, because there are different ways to collocate data centers. And I feel like today, not enough people are taking the time actually to think through those type of events.
I'm going to ask the audience to get a couple of questions together in a moment. But and again, obviously make them on point with our topic of AI and sustainability. But please, you can respond. But I want to give you the chance to explain why there may be an oversupply of data centers. We'll come to you. But Carol, you had a follow-up to her?
Not a follow-up, but it was more of an addition. So if you wanna put
Go on, let's hear it, and then we'll come back to the unrelated point about the data center oversupply.
Well, and I think the other opportunity, I was gonna say, not weakling, the opportunity that we have is, are we using AI to solve the right problems, right? And I think, and I was actually gonna pick on you, Vijay, because in your opening earlier, you talked about how a few decades ago you wrote the book about flexibility, right?
Did, yes.
And this is like, to me, a case in point of flexibility is not a new topic, but all of a sudden, I believe that today with the AI technologies we have, it's one of the few times that we can actually get to flexibility at scale because of AI. And I'll give you a reason why, right?
Okay.
It's like, you know the subject better than anybody, but back in the day, when you talked about flexibility, it was a bit of a hypothetical because it required to actually transact that. It required someone to call the electricity company to be like, listen, we got some heavy load here. Could we turn things off? And someone would have to physically go and push buttons and turn levers, et cetera. Right. And then we started talking about consumer grade flexibility. So that meant like, oh, we'll send a text message to all the people that live in this region when we want to try and optimize the grid because of different load imbalances. Well, what would that require from the end customer? You'd have to be at home when that happened, turn things off, and then wait until the moment and turn things back on, right? Like, it's just not realistic and it's not pragmatic and you can't actually execute. So now fast forward, and we take a look at some of the solutions developed by amazing innovators in the industry, and I'm gonna give Octopus a shout here. They're developing flexibility solutions that are AI enabled, which means it executes that entire chain so long as you give it permission to, without you pushing a button or doing anything, right? And now we're actually talking about a grid that is flexible because you're controlling the demand and supply signals in a way that is seamless for the end user, so long as they're aware of what they want to drive in terms of outcome. So I think, like, from a, how do we able to, we would not able to solve that problem for the past few decades. It was not really the mechanism to be able to control all of those workflows. We can now. And so I think, like, I've got 100 of these, but I'll pause. But like, I think there's just so many problems in the energy ecosystem that we could be solving with now this new surge of AI. And I actually think it's great that everybody in this room raised their hand, because the other thing that's happened is the new technology has become accessible in no other emerging technology has ever been in the past, 2 years. So people understand it because you're playing with it and you're trying to, use it for your day to day. So now the next question is like, okay, you use it in your day to day. Now what's the problem that your, organization, the world hasn't been able to solve because it hasn't had the technology? So I'll pause there.
I love your example, Carol, because you get to my provocation and the myth that I see on this topic. There's an over-obsession with the way we make AI, and not enough attention paid to how we will use AI, because there's two sides to this equation. And of course, it's right to look at the energy consumption and the footprint of AI, and that is correctly a lot of attention is being paid to now, and the price implications and not socializing the costs of grid transmission. These are all absolutely appropriate to look at. But we don't study enough or think enough and even monitor how already AI is emerging as something of a sustainability superpower. And I do spend time talking to, among other things, one of the world's great experts who's floating around this conference in the next couple of days, David Sandalo from Columbia University, whose team does an annual report on this. I encourage all of you to look it up, on AI and sustainability, literally the topic of this session. And you'll see enormous use cases where we're already seeing either nascent or full-blown applications. And when you add up all of that, and last April, my colleagues and I did a major package in The Economist that looked at all of this and drew the conclusion based on evidence we presented already now almost a year ago, that we're already seeing enough use cases of AI in practice, saving energy or sparing resources or enabling new kinds of activities that are pro-sustainability, that this is really a remarkable new tool that has to be weighed against the footprint of making it. Or training, let's say, which may have multiplier effect when we actually use AI in the wild. So, but I wanted to come to give you your opportunity and then come to the audience as I promised. Why do you think there's an overbuild, perhaps, or oversupply? I think was the phraseology you used.
Yeah,
AI.
it's
What's
not
your
an
thinking there?
overbuild of data centers. It's an oversupply of land opportunities in the sense that today you have a lot of people who went into the development business over the past 2 years to try to propose, new sites for data centers. And I think on one side, it's great because we see actually emerging new regions from a data center opportunity, which I think from a community benefits actually are pretty good. It creates local economic growth and jobs. But on the other side, it kind of like broke the machine from a grid perspective in a few aspects. Like for instance, if you're in the renewable energy development space or data center development space, you know that you just go and put some grid connection request here and there to see where you get power. And that's what really blew up a lot of the processes from the grid operators and is really breaking down the machine today in the sense that nobody can get an answer because people on both sides are a little bit immobilized. While we all know that actually the grids, distribution, local grids generally are not used on average more than 50% of the time that they're built for. So there's a lot of efficiency there. And so can we re-engage? Can we develop new models, new partnerships, for instance, to try to work together on like what are those data, what are those inefficiencies, and how can we develop new solutions together to make sure that those data centers get connected in a way that they need from a market and development perspective, but in a way that is good for the local communities and the grid long term. And so that can be flexibility, it can be different siting options, it can be different reliability scenarios, but there are just many different ways to make a lot of those decisions in a longer term perspective. Today, I just feel like we're building for the next 3-4 years of bridge.
Right.
And the problem is a lot of those gigawatt assets are going to be stranded behind the meter. And that's
we've seen this in every wave of infrastructure boom, right? Well, from the railways to the later on to fiber, of course, more recently. We do see overbuild, overenthusiasm, misdirection of capital, and boom and bust cycle. Just for a story that we're publishing tomorrow in The Economist, related to this topic, I talked with a couple of experts deep in this area. One of them made an estimation of the United States that probably only about 25% of the planned data centers will actually ultimately be built and be viable. One who's public about this, a former energy director for Meta, Peter Free, who's outspoken now that he's left, but he was there for 10 years, he thinks the figure is probably only about 10%. Now, he's a bit of a provocateur, maybe saying that to stir the pot a bit, but that gives you a sense of how knowledgeable people are thinking. It's certainly not 100% or 80% or 50% of those that you see being planned in different parts of, in that example, it's America. Maybe there'll be a similar story in other places as well. Take it with a grain of salt. Don't just multiply the energy footprint and say, look at all the coal plants or gas plants that are going to come. You need to have a discount factor and then also look to alternative ways to fuel it. And we have a range of questions that have come in. Thank you for that on the Slido. A couple of them actually have to do with flexibility. Let me see. Anybody wants to take the question of flexibility and how they might, one is specifically for you, Maud, but there are a couple of questions on this. Can data centers provide flexibility of demand? Something that was mooted on the main stage earlier. How realistic is it? Who wants to, maybe you want to jump in on this? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll start with just sort of the data center perspective from that, right? So I guess the term flexibility, if we're talking about flexibility to be able to do demand response or certain other things, I think that's critical for us to be able to have different options and availability. I don't want people to think, at least from a traditional data center perspective, that we can just turn the data center on and off when it needs to be, right? I think what has to happen is as data centers get more into the community, the way we design the data centers with backups, with battery storage, with the ability to bridge and have the ability to sustain different power outages and solutions, I think the design that we have can actually be leveraged to provide flexibility to that grid. We do demand response quite often now and actually did it a few weeks ago in the US, in Ashburn actually. There was a power issue and we turned on our generators or our backup systems and we were able to sort of bridge over the gap and help the utility provider. And I think those types of partnerships are going to be a lot more critical. So the term flexibility here is critical because we actually have a lot of systems within our data center design that helps with that flexibility and backup capability.
Now, quick answers, just because we're running out of time. On flexibility, Maud, I'll give you
100%. I think it should be kind of incentives-based and technology agnostic in the sense of like, what are the benefits as a load can I get from getting flexibility, and what is the best way for me to meet this flexibility criteria? It can be on-site, it can be off-site. Maybe I go give batteries to my local community for free. And here is the flexibility that we need on the grid. To the question on flexible connections, yes, 100%. But what is a flexible connection? I think that's what we need to do today, is sit down at the table with all our stakeholders and grid operators and define actually what means a flexible connection and build the solutions from there.
There's one question that's a technical question. Now, what percentage of energy is consumed by AI? What if all of it's coal in Kazakhstan and so on? Here, I direct you to the International Energy Agency. By their estimation, it's only about 1.5% globally of electricity consumption goes to AI data centers. In fact, not even AI, all data centers, in which AI is a growing and significant part, of course. By far, air conditioning, electrification of manufacturing, of transportation, those are bigger drivers of the global consumption of electricity going forward. And according to the IEA, the rate of electrification is anticipated to rise at 3 times the rate of overall energy growth in the next 5 to 10 years. In other words, we are in an electricity super cycle, but it's overhyping it to say it's all AI. There are multiple factors going in this direction. That's, again, something to bear in mind. Just a lightning round, just because I'm told we have just barely a minute here. I started you off with a provocation. Now let's end everyone with a positive thought for the future. What's one thing you'd want to leave the audience with as they think about the future of sustainability in AI? Go.
Make smarter choices, solve the right problems.
There we go.
Innovation's driving a lot of change in the industry, and I've never seen the rate of innovation that we're doing right now in the industry.
On the solution side, hopefully AI can finally help us unlock a lot of those digital tools that we dearly need for the grid and the transformation to clean energy.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being such good sports. Give them a nice round of applause. Thank you for your questions.